All right. Welcome if you're joining us. I know it's late in the day, so you all must be dedicated to learning about fuel and fitness. If you don't know me, my name is Chrystal Hedges, and I am one of the state and well-being program coordinators. So I basically do employee wellness for state employees. Our program is called Thrive. If you're familiar at all with what our program used to be called about 4 years ago, it was considered to be OK Health. Most people, we are new to a lot of people because we serve all state employees. So we serve about 31,000 now, and then we also provide services to you all being education employees as well. So we try to incorporate as much as we can our services and extend them and expand them out to education employees. And so we'll go a little bit today. I won't go too much into kind of give an idea of what our philosophy is at Thrive. But today specifically, we're going to talk about fuel and fitness. And generally, when we think of physical well-being, these are the two major components that people are actually most interested in. And so this is usually a popular topic, but Thrive also covers a holistic view of health and wellness. And so we cover and provide a lot of opportunities and services around career and purpose, also social well-being, which plays a huge part in that, financial well-being, and then, like I said, the physical well-being aspect. And we also incorporate emotional, so stress management things. And I know the upcoming months, my colleague will be coming to speak specifically about stress management. And then also the last component, which most people don't think of health and wellness, is community. And kind of, the volunteering and a lot of research coming out on that. But today we're going to talk everything about nutrition and fitness and kind of share a different focus than what people generally think of. So we're going to get started. Our objectives today that I'm going to cover is we're going to learn about the 3 micronutrients. And so people are like, micronutrients, what are those? But generally those are our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our fats. We'll also determine how to make fuel selections to meet our body's needs. And we'll talk a little bit about individual needs that we have. We'll identify added sugars on nutrition labels and kind of the interesting discovery of nutrition labels and how they can make or break some of our selections. The next objective will gain some better thinking around food and kind of that relationship around food and what that means to different people. The next kind of piece that we'll talk about is why we're calling it movement. And so when we think of fitness, and I won't go too much into it quite yet, but kind of why we are calling it movement, the benefits of movement, and what do those benefits look like for us, and then different types of movement, and the different types that we should probably try to include when we think about movement. We'll briefly talk about tracking, and this is an interesting, tracking is a very, how to utilize technology to better engage ourselves, and specifically for accountability when it comes to movement, is emerging a lot and is more at our fingertips with our phones now. And then we'll talk about fitness level versus weight and kind of the philosophy around those two different things. So if there's any questions that you want to have, please feel free to use the chat box. And if I don't address them right then, I will try to address them at the end of the presentation. Okay? So to kind of start out, a disclaimer. It's very important to know I'm not a registered dietitian. So my background is not, my degree is not in being a registered dietitian. So the only person that you should trust to give you specific dietary recommendations based on your needs is a registered dietitian. They have tremendous amount of knowledge and experience around people that have different conditions, different dietary needs, even different dietary preferences. And so the only person that you should trust to give specific recommendations to you specifically would be a registered dietitian. So as a health educator that I am, this presentation is really meant to provide a foundation and really offer guidance for fueling and the fitness for your body. So kind of just keep that into consideration, and to kind of really understand that. There are several, and depending on your insurance provider, there is opportunity to check into looking at a lot of insurance companies are moving towards being able to cover partially or fully specific appointments with registered dietitians based on several different conditions or needs that a person has in regards to their health and wellness. And so I definitely encourage you to check that out if you feel the need to have specific dietary recommendations for you. So we're going to kind of jump right into it, fueling for your body. Because really, good nutrition doesn't have to be scary. And a lot of times we think that good nutrition, anything that's healthy or nutritious, it can be scary. It can be scary because we, food is an we can have an emotional relationship with food on many different levels. And it's a habit. We create and form habits on what we eat or what are our choices or what's convenient. And so what does good nutrition mean when I say that? And so according to the World Health Organization, the nutrition is the intake of food considered in relation to the body's dietary needs. And so that sounds like an official definition. And so what does that really mean? It really means that fueling our body, what foods do we use to fuel our body to meet the needs of our body? And that's kind of a simplistic view of what that definition is saying. And so there's 4 things that really hallmark a good diet. And these are general ideas of when we talk about good diet or good nutrition choices, what does that mean and what does that hallmark? And so the first one is quality food. And so after we learn about each micronutrient, which I will go through, I'll give some recommendations on how to choose the highest quality of this type of food. And so sometimes when we make nutrition choices, I kind of like an analogy of gas in the car. And so nutrition is really putting gas in our bodies to move forward, to have energy to complete the things throughout the day. And so the food choices that we have can either make the car go, make the car go slow, or sometimes, you might have, if you've ever had bad gas in your car, what happens? Generally, it is puttering along. And so really thinking about what are those quality foods to really basically get the biggest bang for your buck for your body. And then also the variety of choices. So because we get bored with food easily, we as humans, we get bored with food. And a broader array of choices means you're more likely to meet your nutrition needs. And so this is where a lot of people, like when we talk about diets or restrictive diets, sometimes we set ourselves up to fail, and specifically with this kind of principle is because when we start cutting out certain foods that we have, we eventually kind of get bored with food. And so sometimes our boredom of choices tends to cause us to fall off the wagon. And so really actually trying to find variety of choices really helps us meet our nutrition needs. On top of that variety of choices, there's different nutrients in different foods. And so our body, to really have a well balanced diet is why they say that, because there's certain types of nutrition that we get from different types of foods. And we talk a little bit about that when we go through the macronutrients. And then the moderation. Usually people, when I say I'm health and wellness, usually the first thing they notice is if they have food with them. It's usually like, oh, you're the food police. And I'm not at all. And they're kind of like, oh no, they're going to see what I eat and stuff like that. And generally that is not the case. It's about moderation and knowing that, not everyone should be, not everyone's going to eat, the healthiest food possible. and really denying us that, denying those splurges. And so the biggest takeaway that I want you to get from today is that all food is good in moderation. There's no really evil foods, and sometimes we label foods as being bad foods or like evil foods to stay away from. And so some foods just provide more nutrition than others. Going back to the quality food, but that doesn't mean you should stay away from certain foods. And like I said, that's what causes us to kind of set ourselves up to fail when we specifically get into restricted diets. And so it just means that you are mindful about when and how you enjoy them. So going back to that mindfulness that a lot of people talk about in regards to nutrition or just anything in general. So for example, we know donuts don't provide us much nutritional value in regards to what our body needs, but they are delicious. And so now as I bring this up about donuts, I'm sure you're going to be craving donuts later as I kind of like cued you to think about donuts. But they're delicious. And so maybe you don't eat donuts for breakfast every day, but you mindfully choose to really indulge in one donut on occasion, and really thinking about that moderation. And then the last kind of hallmark of a good diet is adequate to meet needs. And so when I say adequate, it's adequate to meet your specific dietary needs. And to really understand this, and so sometimes what happens when a lot of people like I said, go back to that restrictive diet and seeing what worked for one friend that you see has lost, several pounds, and you want to say, okay, well that diet worked for them, so that diet is going to work for me. And so really meeting your specific dietary needs, and every body is different. When we eat food, a chemical reaction happens with our body. And so really thinking about simplistically, that is what happens. And so sometimes that chemical reaction is different for different people. So those are kind of the four hallmark of a good diet, and we'll kind of go into a nutrition one-on-one. And so every food falls into one of these macronutrient groups, or also known as macros. A lot of people shorten it for macros. And that is carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And there are some foods that have some or all of those macronutrients, but you can determine which group it belongs to based on what has the most amount of. So a food might be considered a carbohydrate and a protein, and we'll go into that in a minute, but it might actually be more of categorized as a carbohydrate because it has more of that carbohydrate makeup than it does of a protein. And the next thing is that micronutrients are vitamins and minerals that enable your body to produce those enzymes or hormones or any other substance that are essential for our proper growth and development. And so we're not going to really cover micronutrients, but to really know the difference between the macros and the micros, and kind of know what that is. So we'll talk specifically about the macros today. I think that'll cover a lot of information. And so the first macro we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. And when you think about carbohydrates, it is a nutrient category that contains compounds that contain carbon and water, aka known as carbohydrate, and shortened for carbs. And the main function is to really provide energy, which is kind of funny because people, usually the saying is that, like, when you get, I do a lot of presentations to groups of people, and so one of the things is when you have a presentation after lunch, generally you have that carb coma later because it hits you. But the main function it is to do is to provide us energy. And you wonder, okay, well, how much energy is it providing us? And these numbers, I don't want you to stress about the numbers, but the numbers are good to reference to each other. So as we go through this, I'll show you, we'll talk about each one and how many calories per gram. And it's not necessarily counting. I don't put that in counting, but I use it as a reference to know which one is heavier in calories per gram than the other, to kind of be able to compare the two. What's wonderful about carbohydrates is it supports brain function. And so there's a lot of diets out there that either low carb or no carbs at all. But the thing is carbohydrates is a nutrient that our body needs, and it specifically is to provide energy, and it's to support our brain function. So we should be eating carbs to a level that helps our brain, because our brain needs to function, and that helps our brain function. And so I know carbohydrates get a bad rap when we think about it in the general public, but it is a necessary nutrient for our body to function well. Okay, so I always try to overcome that stigma that carbohydrates have, and we'll talk more about. I'll go to the next one, of what are some of the sources of carbs and why they have the bad rap. And so common sources of carbs are those, we call them complex carbohydrates. And these are AKA the starches. And when we think of the whole grains, why whole grains are healthy, this is the whole grain category of complex carbs. And when we talk about those, what are the foods that make that connection? What are the benefits of each type of carbohydrate? And so each type of carbohydrate is a little different. We'll go through the different sources of them. But the complex carbohydrates are the ones that include the whole wheat products. They also incorporate vegetables, fruits, and beans. And so what my favorite is when people are like, I'm trying not to eat any carbs. I'm on a no-carb diet. And so when you're on a no-carb diet, you are taking away fruits and vegetables. And so fruits and vegetables are very healthy for us for many reasons. And so I like how it kind of sets these common sources of carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are wonderful because they help digest slower. So one of the things that we do want to do is consume food that keeps us filled up for longer. Okay, so it takes longer to digest the complex carbohydrates. It also makes us feel fuller for longer, okay? That's where the fruits and vegetables come into play, and really the whole wheat products keep us full longer. Then there's the starchy portion. And this is, when we think of the starchy carbohydrates, I think this is where we get into, people get caught up in carbs are bad for us, as the starchy ones, which is the corn, potatoes, and what corn and potatoes can raise our blood sugars at a faster rate and are higher in calories. So thinking about the different types of carbohydrates to pick, those complex carbohydrates of corn, potatoes can raise our blood sugars at a faster rate and are generally a little bit higher in calories. Like I said, not to say that they're not, bad for us, but to really recognize that when you eat a lot of those types of make those types of choices. And then the next kind of common source of carbs is the fiber part. So that really that it goes into our large intestines undigested. So the foods that are full of fiber go into our large intestines undigested. And what's wonderful specifically about this is that it reduces our risk of heart disease and diabetes, because those foods are kind of like cleaning your intestines as it goes through the large intestines, and then that's pretty important because we want food to flow as it goes through our body, and so this is one of the ways to do it with fiber. Fiber is also considered a complex carbohydrate. So when I mentioned fruits and vegetables, those are generally high in fiber. That is considered also a complex carbohydrate. So plants, any sort of plants. Wonderful about fiber, it feels fuller. You feel fuller faster and longer. So once again, keeping us full for longer. And when you stay full faster and longer, it really helps with weight loss and gives us more energy. We tend to have more energy as well. And so the recommended amount is 25 grams per day. Americans usually consume, data is really showing this, that Americans usually consume about 16 grams. So most Americans are not consuming as much fiber as needed for their body. And so, not to say that you should go from, even if you don't consume 16 grams, but, slowly add more fiber into your day. Sometimes if you go too fast, you do have some, discomfort in the tummy. And so kind of recognizing that. So this is something that you want to stair step within your diet, if this is something you want to incorporate more. And then we have the simple carbs. These are AKA sugars. These are the wonderful foods that we love, that are, make us happy sometimes. Sometimes these are the go-to foods for like emotional eating. When people, you kind of emotionally eat due to like stress or whatever the case may be. And so higher quantities in fruits, processed foods, honey, maple syrup, and dessert items are generally this. And so simple carbs are found in all carbs. These are the ones that we can digest fast and gives us quick energy when needed. So thinking about, there are times we need quick energy. And so if you've ever seen, especially coming up with a marathon, right? Sometimes simple carbs are important for us. Sometimes training or even within physical activity, those simple carbs do play a purpose, and they play a purpose of giving us energy quick when it's needed. But what happens is depending on your lifestyle, you eat a lot of those simple carbs and you don't use up the glucose. And so then it's stored. And that's where simple carbs become kind of a havoc for our body. The next thing is all natural versus added sugar. So we're kind of moving into sugar. What does all natural sugar mean? And basically sugars that are naturally found in foods. Okay? Not that are added, but they're naturally found in foods. And these include items such as fruits, and so which is fructose. It includes milk items, which is lactose, and some vegetables have some fructose in them, which some people don't think, you never thought about all natural sugar, but some vegetables do. And so the major sources of added sugars are usually soft drinks. Those have a huge amount, and we'll go through that in a minute. Dairy products, a lot of dairy products have that lactose, right? Candy, even canned fruits for that preserving the fruits within the cans, have a lot of added sugar, which now there's ones where you can limit where it's light syrup or, some alternatives of having less added sugars. And then, of course, the desserts, and majorly with juice, specifically even the 100% juice, which is good for us. If you can't, some people don't like fruit, and so 4 ounces a day of juice can help kind of meet that recommendation for your body. But people drink juice, might drink juice a lot, and this is generally a lot with kids. And I won't go too much into that. It has a lot of added sugar in it. And then grain products like the cinnamon toast, honey nut waffles, even oatmeal can have added sugar. And granola bars. These are the big thing. And sometimes you think you could choose, I'll just grab a granola bar thinking it might be healthy. But sometimes it has a lot of added sugar in that. And so added sugars really include any sugar that's added to foods or beverages. And this includes anything from honey to white sugar. So kind of thinking about, okay, so how much sugar am I eating? And so, unfortunately, you can't tell easily by looking at the nutrition facts panel of a food if it contains added sugars, because it will not say added sugar. This is where the food company does amazing things with trying to hide sugar and how much is in sugar, especially with a lot of push of what sugar can do. And so the line for sugars includes both added and natural sugar. So this is what's even difficult. So if you were to have a fresh fruit, it's gonna, if you were gonna list out how much sugar that is, that's a natural sugar. And so natural sugar is different, obviously, from added sugar. And so when you look at sugar, it doesn't distinguish between added sugar or natural sugar. So this makes it even kind of harder. And so naturally occurring sugars are found, like I said, in milk, which is a lactose, and the fruit, which is fructose, and any product that contains milk. So even yogurt and cream. is part of that. And then, or fruit, so fresh or dried, specifically dried, can contain some natural sugars. And so reading the ingredient list on processed foods label can tell you if it contains added sugars, just not the exact amount, if the product also contains natural sugars. So this is what makes it difficult. But some of the ways to kind of look at the nutrition fact here, I have a list of words trying to find that added sugar. It's like when I was a kid, where's Waldo was kind of one of those, like, where's Waldo? Let's find Waldo within the book. And it's kind of like added sugars like that within the nutrition fact. So things like brown sugar, corn sweetener, corn syrup, even fruit juice concentrates. Sometimes I love how marketing has where it has like 100% fruit juice, and then you look back on the nutrition fact and it's like the first ingredient or second ingredient is fruit juice concentrate, and that's an added sugar, or no added sugar, and then you look back on the nutrition fact and you're like, it is added sugar. The huge thing that high fructose corn syrup, most people know that's added sugar, but which is usually the most common added sugar that we know of. Honey, invert sugar, malt sugar, molasses, raw sugar. Sometimes it may be called sugar. And then sugar molecules. So these are ending in ose. So dextrose, fructose, glucose, lactose, maltose, and sucrose. Those are all sugar molecules. And then syrup, pretty heavy in specifically in. So this is what's interesting about and makes it hard with looking at the nutrition fact. So if you can see, kind of looking at the ingredients, I'll give you like, I don't know, 15 seconds to kind of look at and figure out kind of how many ingredients on this list are added sugars. So I'll kind of give you a minute to kind of look over that before I tell you the answer. If you would like to use the chat box to send how many you think is in there, if you want to win the prize of knowing, but I'll definitely tell you. And these are generally a common granola bar that a lot of people get within the store as well. Because it says they're strawberry, naturally flavored. So it kind of does a little bit of marketing. Okay, so if you didn't know, let's see. So we got sugars listed on that nutrition fact. It shows 14 grams, which is quite a bit for one granola bar. Then you got, it lists actual sugar as pretty much the first ingredient. And so if you didn't know too much about nutrition facts, usually it lists the ingredients first as being the most. So the first ingredient, the first 5 or 6 ingredients that you see is the biggest, is the most ingredients in that product. And so sugar is pretty much whole grain oats is sugar. Okay, so that's listed pretty close up there. Then we got the fructose, right? So those oses that we talked about. The corn syrup. Generally, most people can't get that. Then, oh wait, there's another list of sugar. Then we have honey as the next one. And then we have that dextrose. Okay, we have somebody that went on there and put in their idea of how many sugars are on there. We have somebody out there with 11. So you have dextrose. Okay. So that actually makes 6. There are 6 ingredients on the list with added sugars. And if you can see, it's listed as close to the first part of the list as possible. So there's a lot of sugar within this granola bar. And so sometimes people grab granola bars thinking that they're healthier than they are. And so there's 6 ingredients in there. So thank you for chiming in there, Mary, and kind of giving your thoughts on that. And so how much is too much is generally the question with sugar. How much is too much? And so the American Heart Association. So in moderation, sugar is not bad. Like I said, we're not going to talk about put labels on things, but our bodies don't really need the added sugar specifically. So over time, excessive sugar can really lead to that weight gain, and that's what it is. So like I mentioned before, if we don't utilize that glucose, which all food turns into through our body when it has a chemical reaction, and we have excessive sugar, that excessive energy that we did not utilize, it can lead to weight gain because our body has to do something with that. And so the daily added sugar limit for men is no more than 9 teaspoons, which is 36 grams, or 150 calories. And so some people are like, 150 calories, that's not a lot. Or some people think 150 calories is a lot. And then for women, it's 6 teaspoons, which is 25 grams, which is about 100 calories, okay? And so all those sugars are not harmful to our body. Our bodies don't really need the needed sugars to function properly. And so the added sugars can contribute to those additional calories and 0 nutrients to the food. So really this added sugar, it doesn't provide any nutritional value for our body that our body really needs to function well. And so this is where we get into so when we think of, well, how many grams is that? What is that? And so 1 can of Coca-Cola, which I will admit I enjoy soft drinks, occasionally, exceeds the daily limit for added sugars. It is listed as 39 grams. And so regardless of gender, 1 can of Coke already exceeds the recommendations of how much sugar we should consume. And so we're not even incorporating, we just went through that granola bar and how much sugar that was in. And so I'm really saying, I'm not saying to not drink a can of Coke, because like I said, I do indulge in soft drinks myself. But I'm supplying you with information so you really can make that decision and really know how much sugar we're eating, because most of the time we don't realize how much sugar we're consuming a day within the foods that we choose. And so here are some tips for making some better selections. And so carbohydrates. Like I said, carbs are not bad, but you can make better selections for your dietary needs. And so look for the word whole when it comes to grains. So really thinking about those whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, and then minimize the foods with lots of added sugar. So really trying to minimize those foods, however that is in your diet now, try to minimize those. And then try substituting complex for simple refined carbs. So this is a perfect example of, if you love white bread, who doesn't love white bread, especially when you want to make a grilled cheese? Those are always the best. But try substituting maybe sometimes when you eat sandwiches, maybe trying to have the whole wheat bread as opposed to the refined carb, which is the white bread. And then also fruits and vegetables, go for a variety and for color, okay? And choosing various foods with different colors, especially the deeply hued colors. So those are like I said, the vegetables like that, the spinach, right? And those sorts of things. And then from each food group, provide the whole range of vitamins, minerals, fiber, for our body needs. And so when you do variety and color, it provides us all the different vitamins and minerals that our body needs to function. And then when it comes to fruits and vegetables, choose 100% fruit juice with no added sugar. And it's still pretty sweet, the fruit juice, specifically for kids as well. And so I already reminded you back to that car analogy. So our body's the car and the food is our fuel. And so we want to find those good quality fuel to really put gas in the tank. And so choose good carbs not no carbs, is kind of the message here that I want to kind of take home with that. The next macronutrient we're going to talk about is protein. And a macronutrient contains nitrogen as well as carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which are like, what is that? They're also known as amino acids, okay? And so there's 20 total amino acids, but of those 20 amino acids that our body needs, 9 of them must be taken in from food. So 9 of the 20 amino acids, we need to gain those amino acids from the food that we eat. And so the main function of protein is to build your body, not to provide energy like carbohydrates are. And so it provides the same calories per gram. If you kind of look down there, actually we'll go through the functions first before I kind of jump us to the energy. But functions, so the functions of protein is to build and repair, okay? Regulate our body functions, so including that metabolism, our heart health, and creating muscle and blood. Protein also helps with immunity. And so specifically, and looking at the energy, so the last thing that protein provides is energy, okay? And so it provides the same calories per gram as carbohydrates, but it's digested differently than carbs, okay, in our body. And so animal sources of protein tend to deliver all those amino acids we need. So like I said, of those 9. But other protein sources such as fruits and vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds lack 1 or more amino acids. And so really having a protein is a good source to really connect with those other fruits and vegetables and grains that I just mentioned. Metabolism, people don't realize protein helps regulate our metabolism, but it also helps our skin, our hair and our muscles, our organs, our hemoglobin in our blood. And so also what most people don't realize too is our immune system depends on protein, because the protein that we depend on makes antibodies to keep us healthy. And so all protein isn't alike, just like carbohydrates. So we're going to kind of go through a little bit about tips for making better selections when it comes to protein. And so we want to choose low-fat or lean meat and poultry. And so this is what gets people a lot, is a lot of people like protein. It's usually when you think of a meal, the general standard is you have meat, potatoes, and then something else, you know? And so choosing that low-fat or lean meat or poultry, okay? And then selection of seafood that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And so those omega-3 fatty acids are, when we think of those, it's salmon, it's trout, it's sardines, it's anchovies. It's really the fatty fish, okay, that we think about. And we must get it from food. And so it's also shown to help prevent heart disease, stroke, decrease our blood pressure, even decrease our heart rate, and then decrease triglycerides, okay, and ease inflammation. So depending on a lot of people's, going back to everybody needs, you know, everybody's different, and some depending on health conditions or whatever might ease a lot of inflammation that people have. Tip for making is to bake it, broil, or grill it is generally the way to make a better selection. And then vary your protein routine by incorporating the eggs and the beans and some nuts and seeds. And so protein isn't just animal sources, but there's other alternative sources as well. And then choosing low-fat milk, cottage cheese, and yogurt, and choosing those low-fat options within those better selections. And then avoid processed cheese foods. And so avoiding processed cheese foods, they're made from vegetable oil. Most processed cheeses are. They're not made from milk. And so the processed cheeses can really get us too when we make those selections. Okay, so then we're going to kind of move on to the next macronutrient, which is fats. The name in itself already has a bad rap too, just like carbohydrates, because we are kind of in this thought process that fats are bad for us because we can't take fats in. But it's also, fats are also considered to be known as lipids, triglycerides, and cholesterol. And so the two main functions of fat is once again to provide energy. And so you can see that's 9 kilocalories per gram and it's to make you full. And so fats make you full as well. And so fat has twice as many calories as protein and carbs, if you remembered. But some of the other wonderful functions that fats provide us is cell development, hormone function. Fats also can protect our organs. Obviously, back to too much protection can cause problems too. But the fats protect our organs, and then helps absorb fat-soluble nutrients and vitamins. So fats also help us absorb the nutrients and vitamins. So it's one thing to actually have nutrients and vitamins from, either get them from the micros, but fats are important because it helps absorb those a little bit better. And so, once again, not all fats are created equal or the same, just like the other macros that I mentioned. I do want to add, I forgot to mention, cell development is important, especially when it comes to the brain and the nervous system. And so that's why fats are pretty important too. And so kind of going at what are the different categories of fats. And so we generally have the saturated fats, okay? And those are solid at room temperature, okay? Often found in animal products. So when we think of our, pork, chicken, beef, those are considered to be saturated fats. And a few foods do remain as liquid at room temperature. It's recommended that no more than 10% of your total calories should be saturated fat. So when you're looking at the standard 2,000 calorie diet, it's no more than 22 grams from that 2,000. And then liquid at room temperature or high in saturated fat. So the ones that are liquid at room temperature are generally the coconut oil, the palm oils, and the whole milk are generally what falls into having some saturated fat. The unsaturated fat, okay? These are usually called the oils, and they're usually typically come from plant sources and fish, okay? So going back to those omega-3s, that having unsaturated fats and having those oils. Those are like the canola oil and vegetable oil, and which is generally not our choice that we have, but the olive oil is generally the healthier selection. And then there's the trans fat, which most people are familiar with. And this is actually, trans fat is made from vegetable oils through a process called hydrogenation. And so it's small amounts, there's small amounts of it in meat and whole milk and even in milk products. And it's also obviously included in, cookies, cakes, crackers, icing, even type of margarines, or even with a lot of microwave popcorn is considered to have some trans fats in it. And so really reducing or eliminating trans fats, and there's been, even within the food industry, there's been a lot of trying to eliminate those trans fats. And so the FDA is working to eliminate those trans fats from processed foods, because what makes trans fats bad, that a lot of that research has come out, undeniably, is it raises your LDL cholesterol. And so that our LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol, okay? And then it actually lowers our HDL cholesterol, which is our good cholesterol. And those are things you don't want to do. Those are a pathway straight to heart disease and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and all that. So FDA is really working to eliminate these trans fats. What's interesting is that they can enter, say trans fat is at 0, even though it has 0.5. And so 0.5 is like the smallest amount without actually having to put it on the label. And so the food industry has gotten really good with, the food company has gotten really good with, well, this doesn't have trans fat in it, but it may, because it, 0.5 They don't have to put it on there. And so really it's been reduced tremendously, though, over the course of several years. Tips for making better selections when it comes to healthy fats is choose healthy fats, okay? Like I said, healthy fats such as olive oil or canola oil. So instead of, that vegetable oils that a lot of people use for frying, trying to kind of substitute for those olive oils and canola oils. And then limit our solid fats. And so really limiting our butter, our margarine, even shortening if you use that. And then even lard, because these are solid fats and high in saturated fat. So even people still continue to even cook with lard. And so really limiting those solid fats. And then consider eating fish, once again, and or other good sources of omega-3 fatty acids, like I mentioned a couple slides ago. Eat especially those oily fishes, such as the salmon and the trout and the tuna, herring and sardines, and not fry the fish. And so sometimes we eat those fish and then we eat them fried, and that really kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. But the omega-3 fatty acids can also, when we think of not just the fish, but there's fatty acids like the flaxseed oil, the soybean oil, and the walnut oil that some people kind of include in smoothies and different products. They kind of incorporate some of those because the healthy fats fill you up quickly. And so, but they're higher in calories, so you only need a little bit to eat. And then why diets don't work. And so I kind of alluded to this, but I kind of want to touch a little bit more on this. And why diets don't work is diets usually focus on deprivation as opposed to foods that you can eat, okay? And so deprivation of food triggers our body to really lower its metabolic rate and causes the body to store fat. And so it goes back before most of us were born in the ancient ages of when we go long periods of time with not having specifically protein or food. And so when we have a deprivation of food, our body stores it and lowers our metabolic rate so we can survive and adapt to living with that limited amount of food. And so generally also what happens is when you resist, it persists. And sometimes when you restrict yourself from different foods, you can start obsessing about food more. I like to always compare this. I have 4 kids, and so it's always once you say not to do something, they kind of obsess about doing it. And it's kind of very familiar when we start resisting what foods we shouldn't, when we label them good or bad, and then we start obsessing about the food more. And so it really hits home because sometimes when people are getting ready for a diet, they'll go and splurge, usually the day before they start, and then they start, and then after that, when you start restricting yourself, you start dreaming about certain foods you can't have anymore. You start craving those foods more than you did before. And so really not labeling those food as good or bad. And so really having a well-balanced diet of all types of foods is really the good way. Not to say that diets don't work for people, because diets do work for people, and different diets work for people. I know a lot of people talk about keto and even a flexitarian diet, and flexitarian diet is generally you limit a certain amount of not having this fatty protein throughout the week, but you might have protein a couple times a week, and that you kind of flex. That's why it's called flexitarian, not that you take it all out of but really thinking about why diets don't work. But there are diets that do work for people. So I don't want to think that all diets don't work for people, because different things work for different people, but really making that choice for yourself. And so if anyone's familiar with My Plate, I love this because it's a visual. We don't eat thinking about how many calories I have. We don't eat thinking how many grams is this, is. I mentioned, like I said, the per grams of energy, and it's not that. It's just to kind of reference the differences between the different macros. And so My Plate is a realistic way to look at your food and fuel. It's a visual. This is how we eat. We eat looking at our plate. And it's the replacement for that outdated food pyramid that even still people try to go by. And so this is really the recommendation to do. And so eating healthy is a journey. It can be shaped by so many factors in our life. It can include our stage of life. It can include different situations we're in. It can include preferences. Sometimes, if you've ever heard people talk about your taste buds change every 7 years, your preferences change. Having access to foods. Sometimes our food choices of eating healthy, having just access to food can be different. Our culture and what cultural foods we have within the culture that we identify with, and that can make a difference. Traditions that we have, obviously Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, all those different kind of traditions we have as that we make as a family, and then the personal decisions that we make over time. And so all food and beverage choices count, but My Plate offers kind of some ideas and tips to really how to create a healthier eating style that really meets your individual needs and improves your health. And so this is really that personal decision, but that it's a journey, and it's shaped by those different factors, and to kind of be aware of that. Last thing I'm going to kind of quickly move through is enjoyable movement, okay? Why movement, okay? When we normally think of words physical activity, what specific activities come to mind? It's usually running, biking, swimming, weightlifting, things that make us sweat, and not always things that we enjoy, okay? So by using the word movement, which is something how people think of it new, instead of that physical activity, because sometimes when we think of physical activity, a lot of people think, I have to go to the gym. Or most people relate physical activity to running, even though most people actually don't enjoy running. And so by using the word movement, it's instead of physical activity, we can put a positive spin on giving our bodies an opportunity to move. And so movement can mean anything. The only requirement is that you are not still, which is opposite, obviously, of movement. So most important, it should be something that's enjoyable to you. And I think this is sometimes the link that we miss when we talk about being active, is finding the movement that you enjoy and that's enjoyable to you. And so the benefits of movement through the physical well-being aspect is obviously it prevents and delays type 2 diabetes. Okay? And there are a few ways that movement lowers our blood glucose. So short term, it can help us lower our blood glucose. So the short term usage of incorporating this. Insulin sensitivity is increased, so your cells are better able to use any available insulin to take up the glucose during and after activity. So even after you've finished working or doing some sort of movement, working out or doing movement or whatever, any available insulin takes up that glucose after your body has stopped exercising, and that's what makes exercise a really good short term to really help lower that blood glucose so it doesn't sit in your bloodstream. Long term, it can lower your A1C. And so when your muscles contract during activity, it really stimulates another mechanism that's completely separate from insulin. And this mechanism really allows your cells to take up the glucose and use it for energy, whether insulin is available or not. And so when your muscles contract and you're using your muscles through some sort of activity, you don't have to have insulin to really take up the glucose and use that for energy. And so this long-term effect can really lower your A1C. And so when people have type 2 diabetes, generally a lot of people recommend how to incorporate more movement in your day because it can really affect our blood glucose. And so this is how exercise can help lower blood glucose in the short term, and when you're active on a regular basis, it can lower your A1C. More benefits of movement, it can prevent or delay heart disease. So your heart's a muscle, and the more we work that muscle, the better it performs, okay? So the heart works harder during movement. It can also, some cancers, having a high BMI puts you in a greater risk for certain cancers, which is liver cancer and kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, just a few. But however, we know that more movement does lead to lower BMI, therefore lowering our cancer risk. It increases new brain cells, so it's good to continue to have new brain cells. Those new brain cells can help really think better And so that's why they say you should always, if you feel sluggish or you're stressing out, generally, they say try new brains, incorporate exercise, because it can create new brain cells. It improves our abilities and prevents falls, which is huge when it comes long-term wise. It helps us be more flexible, right? We work our muscles during movement, which improves our coordination and our strength when we do this, and that it can reduce the risk of falling as we age. And so generally that's the number one disability that older people have is the falls. It improves our mood. So when you exercise, the neurotransmitter dopamine is released, and that reward system of the brain. So you're in a better mood, which goes to the next one, which is reduces stress and you sleep better. So one exercise session that you have generates 90 to 120 minutes of relaxation response due to the release of those neurotransmitters, the serotonin and the dopamine that a lot of people are familiar with. And so those neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, is what makes us feel happier and more relaxed and less stressed. And so just one exercise session can really generate 90 to 120 minutes of less stress and also better sleep. Basically, kind of sum this up, National Sleep Foundation did a research that more than 3/4 of exercisers, so you're talking like 76 to 86%, said that they had better sleep quality, was very good or fairly good in the past 2 weeks compared to non-exercisers, which is only about 56%, and there's showed a correlation between the two. And so you just sleep better when you have more movement. And so increases chances of living longer and really having that better quality of life that we want to have, especially as we age. More well-being enhancements, our mood and our emotional well-being are increased when we participate in enjoyable movement. And then oftentimes for movement to be enjoyable, we involve our social networks. So a lot of people do like walking groups, specifically at work, that can really incorporate that social well-being and that emotional well-being as well. How often should we move? The CDC recommendations for adults is about 2 hours and 30 minutes of moderate intensity movement per week. And moderate intensity means you're working hard enough to raise your heart rate and sweat a little. And we usually use the talk test. So if you can talk but cannot sing the words to your favorite song, then it's moderate movement. And then there's the also recommended 2 days a week of muscle strengthening movement. So really building that strength, that muscle strengthening. Example of moderate intensity is that brisk walking, water aerobics that people love, riding a bike, even playing doubles tennis, and then pushing a lawnmower. Thinking about different ones. Some of the muscle strengthening movement is lifting weights, even using resistant bands. Or if you don't have, any of those things, just body weight exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, even crunches, heavy gardening, so if you're digging and shoveling, and then also yoga, considered to be a strengthening movement as well. So looking at those different options. How often to move, recommendations for adults with vigorous intensity, so about an hour and 15 minutes. So if you work out higher intensity, you have less minutes to get in the week. Still recommend the muscle strengthening movement. Those vigorous intensity movement is the jogging, running, which when people think of exercise, this is what they generally think of. Swimming laps, jumping rope, singles tennis, basketball, any sort of dancing. I'm going to try to finish up because we're right at time. And the rule of thumb is 1 minute of vigorous intensity movement is about the same as 2 minutes of moderate intensity movement. So thinking about it's a 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to moderate to vigorous. So 1 minute of running could be equivalent to 2 minutes of brisk walking. 10 minutes at a time is fine. And so we know that 150 minutes each week sounds like a lot of time, but it's not. And that's 2 hours and 30 minutes. It's about the same amount of time you might spend watching a movie. The good news is that you can spread that activity out during the week. You could spread it out even during the day. Even 10-minute increments is okay, so even on your break that you have at work. And so we'll go through what are some examples of movement you can perform in 10 minutes. You could do desk and chair exercises. You can do some body weight exercises. Like I said, those walking breaks, even marching in place, and then walking upstairs. If you're in a in a building that has stairs. So tracking your movement is a good way to figure out how much you have of movement. And so first you should decide on your movement goals, and then decide the best way for you to track your goals. And so this should be completely up to you. You can set daily or even weekly goals, or some people can do 12-week goal. And so really thinking about making those goals realistic for you to achieve, and don't forget to have an end goal in mind. So something like, I plan to walk briskly for 30 minutes 5 days a week. It's a pretty big goal for some people. And then at the end of 12 weeks, you set new goals, and then you kind of go from there. And so tracking, there's a lot of tracking different mechanisms now, devices that you can choose. There's apps on your phone, there's actual Fitbits, and devices too. So tracking your movement, so thinking about, what does that mean? Tracking your movement is, here's a list of ideas that you might consider when you're keeping track of, is the frequency, how intense the different your movement is, how long, and then even what type of movement that you've completed each week. And then it's good to kind of think about emotions before and after, and really connect that, because sometimes we don't connect how we feel later, even over the course of the day. And then any likes or dislikes you have. And then, of course, pain. If there's any sort of pain in any movement you have, please stop. It's not my favorite is no pain, no gain, and that's not always necessarily the truth. And so if there's any sort of pain, always important to note that might maybe cause a pain or injury. Why track? Why track? A goal without a plan is just a wish. And so sometimes we don't set goals around there. And so really setting goals for ourselves, we're most likely to follow through with that. And then the last thing to kind of finish up is fitness level versus weight. Your aerobic fitness level may be a better predictor of your physical well-being than your actual BMI. And so looking here, there's a 230-pound person, they're 6'1", and their BMI is considered 30.3. But then you look at a 230-pound person, that might be 6'1", and their BMI might be 30.3. But you can see the difference between the weight composition. And so really thinking about fitness level as opposed to weight. So really kind of summing up, incorporate more whole grains, limit foods with added sugar, eat a variety and color of veggies and fruits, and choose those more lean proteins like chicken and turkey. Select healthier fats and smaller doses. Consider eating fish more often than you do. Move more that's enjoyable to you. Set those weekly, daily goals that's realistic for you, and then try to track your movement to fulfilling those weekly, daily, and goals. So if there's any questions, you can type in the chat box. I'm sorry I went 5 minutes over. I hate that, but I try to do my best to stay on task. But it doesn't so far look like anyone has any questions. I want to thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.